One of the problems with recruiting for investment banking is not the knowledge or skills you acquire, but the access to talk with real investment bankers to put your best foot forward. Our sponsor, WSO Academy, can provide those connections with 60 head mentors who are finance professionals at top firms like Goldman, Centerview, and JP Morgan. Imagine being able to get on the phone within 24 hours with one of the Academy's 1,300 mentors right before a critical interview. Get on the waitlist for WSO Academy today by clicking the link in the show notes or by visiting wallstreetoasis.com/academy. All right. Welcome to Investment Banking Insights, the show dedicated to helping you learn both the technical and non-technical aspects of the investment banking process. Yes, I'm so grateful you're here. My name is Alex Mason, and I am your host. And we're going through accounting fundamentals. And today I want to talk to you about a concept called working capital. And we'll understand a little bit about how it's used and what it really means. So let's go ahead and start with basic definitions. What is working capital? Working capital equals current assets minus current liabilities. And we can break this down even further because we know that an asset is something a company owns, a liability is something a company owes. But what does this word current really mean? Well, current asset is something that a company owns that can be turned into cash within a year. And current liabilities, on the other hand, are bills that the company must pay within a year. So it's this gauge of the relative ability of a company to meet its short-term obligations. That's what this working capital definition or concept is all about. So if a company has high working capital, it's well able to meet its short-term obligations. If it has low working capital or negative working capital, it could be a bad thing. And we'll get into that a little bit more here in a second. But just a quick aside is that there's this auxiliary concept called operating working capital, which as investment bankers, we're going to want to know. And it takes this concept a little bit further. Instead of just subtracting current assets minus current liabilities to get working capital, operating working capital equals current assets minus cash minus current liabilities minus debt. So current assets minus cash minus current liabilities minus debt. And so we have to ask ourselves this question: what does this represent? Well, it tells us how able the company is to pay its bills after accounting for its overall liquidity. Because with the definition of working capital of current assets minus current liabilities, that's just the short-term picture. It doesn't tell us the overall resources or overall obligations the company is working with. Whereas if we subtract those things out in operating working capital, we can get a little bit more clarity into the company's ability to meet its obligations in the context of liquidity. Okay, so that was the quick aside. Now, jumping back to the overall working capital discussion, what about negative working capital? I mean, is that bad? Well, it might be. It might be bad because if a company has negative working capital, it might be a sign that the company is about to head to bankruptcy court because it's unable to meet its short-term obligations. But another possibility does exist. Negative working capital might just be indicative of the business model that the company has. And I'll give you two examples. Example number one are companies with subscription models or long-term contracts that might have a lot of deferred revenue. Now, when a company has deferred revenue, that's a liability on the balance sheet. And deferred revenue, it just refers to the fact that a company may receive cash today for something, but they can't actually recognize it in accounting terms until some later date in the future. So we count that as a liability. And so if you have this liability building up on your balance sheet, your current assets might be fine from a business perspective. But if you subtract your liabilities from your assets, your current liabilities from your current assets, you might get a negative number. And that may not necessarily be problematic It may just be based on the economics of that subscription-based business. And then example number two are business models where companies are paying upfront for their services. So think about examples like Amazon or McDonald's. If someone's going to buy burgers and fries, they're going to pay cash up front. And then the company can use that cash immediately to pay off some of its bills right away. And that can lower working capital. So, for example, paying off accounts payable right away. And so that just may mean that the business is really efficient if the working capital is really low. And it might not necessarily be a sign of financial trouble. So, those are some examples related to working capital. Remember, working capital is simply current assets minus current liabilities. And it's the thing to remember here is that the word current means like short term. So is the company able to meet its short term obligations with its short term resources? And then operating working capital subtracts out the overall cash from the business and also subtracts out the overall debt from the business. So that's what I got for you today with working capital. This is Alex Mason with Investment Banking Insights. And on the next episode, we're going to talk about write downs. What happens when a company sees an asset and is like, this is actually not worth what we thought it was worth? What happens then? We're going to talk about that next time on Investment Banking Insights.